Late that night, when the fire had burned down to a beard of glowing coals and the woods had settled into that deep, heavy silence you only hear far from town, we were all stretched out in our sleeping bags, half dozing. Then came the sound. At first just a faint rustling, almost like leaves brushing in the wind, but the air was still, and the sound was coming from near the food stash we'd carefully tucked under a tarp a few yards away. I propped myself up on an elbow, ears straining. There it was again, a deliberate shuffle, then the unmistakable crinkle of a food wrapper. My heart gave a jolt. Everyone else stirred, whispering, "Bear!" in hushed, nervous tones. I slid quietly out of my bag, bare feet touching the cool ground, and crept toward the sound with my flashlight in hand. The beam caught a pair of eyes, shining back at me like little headlights in the dark. Not a bear, smaller, a raccoon. And not just any raccoon, but the most brazen, fearless little bandit I'd ever seen. He had one paw dug deep into a bag of marshmallows, chewing away without the slightest concern that half a dozen humans were glaring at him. The crunch of his teeth, the smug little noises he made, it was almost insulting. I hissed and waved the light. Nothing! He just blinked and reached for another marshmallow. Someone grabbed a pot and banged it with a stick, a racket that should have sent anything wild running. Not this guy. He actually flinched, looked annoyed, and then continued munching like we were the entertainment for his midnight feast. The more we tried to scare him, the funnier it became. Pots clanged, shoes were thrown. Someone tried clapping and hollering. The raccoon, unfazed, waddled from snack to snack like he was shopping a buffet line. The chaos reached its peak when one of the younger campers decided to charge at him, waving a blanket. The raccoon darted under the tarp, scattering bags and sending granola bars rolling across the dirt. We were laughing so hard, by then we could hardly stand, tears running down our faces at how completely this little thief was outsmarting us. He finally grabbed a cracker, scampered up a tree, and sat there chittering down at us like he'd won a grand prize. And truth be told, he had. That night, lying back in the tent, with the echo of laughter still in my chest, I realised the forest has its own rules. Sometimes it's not the storms or the long hikes that test you, it's the unshakable determination of a raccoon with a sweet tooth. And if you're lucky, the memory becomes one of those campfire stories you can tell for years, where the laughter lingers longer than the frustration. By the time the raccoon retreated to his tree with the cracker, we figured the show was over. We gathered up what snacks we could salvage, tied the rest in a bag, and hoisted it up on a branch with some rope. "That ought to keep him out," someone muttered, though none of us sounded too convinced. We tried to settle down, again, but sleep wouldn't come easy. The night air had a sharp edge, and every creak of the woods had us glancing toward that tree, half expecting our masked thief to make another appearance. Sure enough, it didn't take long. Just when the forest had lulled us back into a quiet rhythm, there came a soft thump. We craned our necks to see the bag of food swaying. The raccoon was already halfway up the rope, climbing paw over paw like a seasoned mountaineer. We scrambled out of our tents again, the campsite erupting in shouts and stomps. Someone grabbed a water bottle and sprayed upward. Another hurled a sandal, but the raccoon clung on with an iron grip, hanging there like some stubborn sailor in a storm. The funniest moment came when one camper decided to lob a shoe directly at him. The raccoon dodged, nimble as could be, and the shoe smacked into the food bag instead. Down it came, bursting open on the ground with a puff of flour and trail mix flying everywhere. That was all the encouragement he needed. The raccoon landed with a triumphant thud and dove straight into the mess, grabbing cookies in both paws like a bandit caught in the act, but too bold to care. The next 10 minutes were pure comedy. We tried forming a half circle around him, clapping and stomping as if we could herd him out. He darted left, then right, zigzagging between us with unbelievable speed. One camper tripped over a log, another nearly tackled the fire pit in his attempt to block the little guy. Every time we thought we had him cornered, he'd dart through our legs or climb halfway up a tent pole before leaping down again. His eyes gleamed in the flashlight beams, his little striped tail whipping behind him as if he were laughing right back at us. Finally, out of breath and wheezing with laughter, we just gave up. We sat there, on the logs, heads in our hands, watching as the raccoon helped himself to a bag of pretzels. He's not scared of us at all, someone said between chuckles. He's the king of this camp now. And at that moment, looking at him perched on a stump with crumbs all over his whiskers, it was hard to argue. He looked perfectly at home. Morning came slow and groggy, the campsite littered with crumbs, overturned bags, and a few socks that had somehow gotten caught up in the chaos. We brewed up some coffee over the coals, shaking our heads and laughing at the memory of the night. But none of us thought the raccoon would return once daylight had broken. "He got his haul," I said, sipping from a tin mug. "We'll clean up and he'll move on." Everyone nodded, relieved, only we underestimated just how bold that critter really was. By late morning, while some of us were patching up the tarp and reorganising what food we had left, he came strutting right back into camp. Not sneaking, not timid, just waddling in like he owned the place. His fur glistened in the sun, and he carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd already won round one. We froze, mouths open, watching him nose around the fire pit and sniff at the cooler. "You've got to be kidding me," someone muttered. This time, we tried brains over brawn. A couple of us rigged a hanging line between two trees and tied up the food in the middle, well out of reach from either trunk. It swung gently above the ground, impossible for even the cleverest raccoon to reach. Or, so we thought. The moment we stepped back, he sat beneath it, looking up with those shiny eyes, chittering softly as if calculating. Then, to our amazement, he started testing the tree trunk, circling it, even pawing at the rope. He couldn't quite reach it, but it was clear he wasn't giving up. Meanwhile, another camper had the idea to lure him away. She scattered a few crackers down the trail and waited. Sure enough, he trotted after them like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. For a second, it looked like the plan worked, until he stopped halfway, picked up 2 crackers at once, and darted right back toward camp, ignoring the rest. By then, we were doubled over laughing, clutching our sides at how thoroughly this animal was outsmarting us. Finally, in desperation, one of the guys grabbed a guitar we'd brought along and started strumming as loud as he could, stomping in rhythm. The rest of us joined in, clapping and singing nonsense words, turning the whole campsite into a raucous concert. The raccoon froze, ears twitching, then, at last, ambled off toward the woods, tail swishing like a flag of victory. We cheered, like we'd just won a great battle, though it felt more like the little rascal had allowed us the win out of pity. By the time we sat back down, the food still dangling between the trees, the lesson was clear. When you're up against a raccoon with brains and nerve, you need more than noise and tricks. You need humility, and maybe a sturdier cooler. That evening, as the sun slid behind the ridge and the woods turned that dusky blue, we gathered around the fire with our bellies full of what little dinner survived the previous night. The memory of the raccoon's raid was still the main topic, each of us retelling the funniest parts with our own exaggerated spin. Someone claimed the raccoon winked at him before stealing the pretzels. Another swore it gave a little bow after outmaneuvering us by the tents. We laughed until our cheeks ached, but underneath it all lingered the same unspoken thought. Would he be back tonight? We tried to prepare. The food was secured high between the trees again, double-checked, and tied off with extra knots. A pile of stones sat ready for throwing, though after the shoe incident, we agreed no more footwear would be sacrificed. A couple of us swore to keep first watch, sitting by the fire with mugs of instant cocoa, eyes darting into the shadows like sentries guarding a fortress. The whole thing felt half serious, half ridiculous. After all, how often do you post guards against a single raccoon? The night grew darker, the fire snapping and spitting sparks into the air. The forest sounds picked up, the low hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind in the pines, the occasional rustle of leaves. Every little sound sent us stiffening, shining flashlights toward the food bag or peering into the black beyond the firelight. Hours passed without a sign, and gradually the tension turned to silliness. We started making bets on what the raccoon might steal next if he did show up. "Your socks," one camper teased, pointing at another whose bare toes wiggled near the flames. "Nah," came the reply. "He's a marshmallow man through and through." At one point, a sudden thump from the trees made everyone leap up at once, flashlights blazing. Heartbeats quickened, shoes scrambled across the dirt, only to reveal a pine cone. It had dropped from a branch onto the cooler lid. The sight of all of us standing ready to defend our camp from a pine cone sent us into another round of breathless laughter. Still, no raccoon. Midnight came and went, and one by one we retreated to our tents, leaving just the fire's glow and a few glowing coals. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting somewhere just beyond the trees, watching us with those gleaming eyes, waiting for the right moment. Maybe he was letting us stew, biding his time until we got sloppy again. Whatever the case, he had etched himself into our trip as much as the hikes and the views. That night ended without a second raid, but the air carried the kind of restless expectancy that only comes when you know the story isn't quite finished. Morning light spilled through the trees in soft golden streaks, and the forest smelled fresh after a cool night. I stretched, blinking awake, half surprised we hadn't been roused by another round of chaos. Some part of me almost missed the racket. We gathered around the fire pit again, yawning and rubbing our eyes, ready to brew coffee and start packing. "Guess he gave up," one camper said with relief. Another grinned, "Or maybe we finally outsmarted him." We all laughed at that, though the thought seemed almost too hopeful. Then came the proof otherwise. As we walked over to lower the food bag, our victory dissolved into disbelief. The rope was chewed clean through, the bag on the ground, and every zipper pried open by nimble little claws. Empty wrappers and crumbs scattered across the dirt told the whole story. At some point during the night, quiet as a whisper, the raccoon had returned and finished what he started. We hadn't heard a thing. The scene was too perfect to be angry. It felt like the final punchline to a long joke at our expense. Someone picked up a torn marshmallow bag and held it high. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced solemnly, "we have been bested." That did it. We collapsed into laughter, some of us doubled over, others shaking our heads in admiration. The raccoon hadn't just raided us. He'd done it with a patience and cunning that made it feel like he was the true camper and we were the clueless visitors in his woods. As we packed up what was left of our gear, the bandit himself made one last appearance. Just at the edge of the tree line, he sat back on his haunches, licking his paws and watching us. Not fearful, not hurried. Just sitting there, like a king surveying his conquered land. We waved half-heartedly, as if to acknowledge the rightful victor. One camper even gave him a mock salute before we hoisted our packs and started down the trail. That raccoon became the legend of our trip. For years afterward, whenever we camped together, someone would bring it up around the fire, the night we fought and lost to a marshmallow-loving thief. It reminded me of something I've always believed: out in the wild, you're not really in charge. The woods, the weather, the creatures, they all play by their own rules. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you walk away with more than just a story of survival. You walk away with a story that makes you laugh long after the trip is done.